Almost exactly 2 years ago, I built this spotted hyena exhibit on Planet Zoo PC, and today I want to find out if I can recreate this exhibit on console. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name is Savannah and welcome to the very first build, at least the very first build that you'll be seeing for Planet Zoo Console Edition. Thank you so much to Frontier for sponsoring today's video and allowing this content to happen. As I mentioned in the very beginning of the video, we are going to be trying to recreate an exhibit that I built almost 2 whole years ago, almost exactly to the date. I think I released it like March 22nd or something like that in 2022. It feels like so long ago, but I thought the very best way for me to show off the differences between Planet Zoo PC and Planet Zoo Console would be to try to make the same thing that I made on PC over here in Console Edition. Now, I had a blast with this, mostly because of the challenge. It was extremely difficult to actually make this exhibit, and not because of the controls or the way the game works at all, but this brought me back to my very first days of playing Planet Zoo as a brand new player, because one, the controls are different and I was relearning it from the ground up, but two, not all of the DLC content is available on console just yet. So this was almost like a base game only challenge that you might see in a lot of other creative games. I really was restricted, obviously, to only the pieces that I had available. And at the time that I made the original spotted hyena exhibit that I'm comparing this to, I had a lot more. We had my very favorite faux rocks from the aquatic pack. We had a lot of the rod recolorable metal pieces from the Australia pack. Key things that I use in every single build that I build were not available, and so I was forced to use replacement pieces, and it really helped push my creativity in making this exhibit. Now, if you're familiar with the original content, the original exhibit that I built, you'll know that it was one of two and there was a restaurant in the middle. I'm not going to be recreating that entire restaurant. I'm only going to be focusing on the one side, the spotted hyena exhibit, and that's mostly for sake of time. I actually have 2 other videos that I'm preparing for you now that'll go live in just a couple days, and you'll see those very soon, but I had a very small window of time in which to create those, all 3 videos. So I wanted to make sure that each of my builds got the attention that it deserved. And overall, this exhibit that you're watching really only took me probably about 3 hours, a little over 3 hours to put together. So in comparison with the time that it takes me to build on PC and the time that it takes me to build on console, despite the fact that I am much slower of a builder on console because I'm still learning, it still did not take an enormous amount of time. It was still a reasonable amount of time to put together at least an exhibit as detailed as this one. Obviously, with PC or with console, you can kind of throw something down, not really worry about where they're placed or what they look like, and get an exhibit together much quicker. But you know me, I like to build pretty things, and I like to take into consideration a smidge of realism and try to think about what the animals might need or want when I'm creating my exhibits. So this one is no exception. I wanted to make sure that I didn't skimp out on detail anywhere, and that I tried to recreate the main focal points of the original exhibit on PC. So that being the back rock wall that has a little bit of variety in it, with not only rocks, but as well as like the mud pieces to give it a little bit of a break so that it's not just solid plain rocks. We have a little bit of fencing that we're working on here. It meets up kind of what would be a support area building for this exhibit, and then we move on to a little bit of guest viewing. So I tried to hit all those major features around the outside of the exhibit, as well as kind of the terrain changes, the little exhibit shelters that I made on PC, as well as giving them a pool to swim in. So those are the main key features that I wanted to accomplish, and looking back on it, the finished project I feel like I really accomplished all of that. It did take me, as I mentioned, much longer, which will bring me to my very first tip for you guys wanting to play on console. Either you've never played a Planet Zoo game at all, or you've only played on PC and you're wanting to move to console. The controls are going to take you a while to get used to, and that's with anything. I don't know about you, but when I go from playing one game and then I pick up another one and the controls are just very different, my fingers are so used to that muscle memory that I end up hitting the wrong thing at the wrong time. And, you know, not gonna lie, sometimes I get a little frustrated at myself, but it just takes practice and it takes a little bit of time. So my biggest tip to you would be don't give up and keep with it. Keep at it. I definitely was not good at this the first time that I sat down to play. This actually is the third exhibit that I made sitting down to record, so I've already got a couple hours worth of practice. Not to mention, I also did film a complete build tutorial going over all of the keys and buttons that you'll want to use, so that helps solidify what I was doing in my mind as well. So I guess my whole point in that is practice and patience, and be nice to yourself. Nobody, almost nobody at least, is good at or perfect at something the very first time they try, and if you are, you're lying. So just sit down and practice and keep at it, and just build to the level of detail that you want to build. If you don't care about having all the little minor details that I put into my exhibit, that's amazing. Go ahead and build what you think looks good and what you want in your zoo. That's one of the beauties of Planet Zoo as a game, or any Planet game in general, is you can play how you want to play. And my very next tip would be that if you're new to building zoos or building exhibits, reference pictures. I almost never ever build anything without looking at reference pictures first. Now, I'm lucky enough, I live in San Diego, so I am just about 30 minutes or so from the San Diego Zoo and the San Diego Wild Animal Park, or what's now called the Safari Park. And so I have amazing zoos at my disposal to go to and to walk around and reference and look at, and I've taken my own pictures and my own videos. But if you are not fortunate enough to be able to visit zoos on a regular basis or visit a wide variety of zoos, the internet is amazing. Go on Google and just start Googling zoo exhibit for whatever animal it is you're looking at. I have found that using the keyword exhibit does tend to give me a little bit better of a selection of photos than saying something like habitat or enclosure sometimes works as well. But if you describe it as habitat, sometimes Google thinks like wild habitat, because that's usually what that word refers to more so than a zoo exhibit. But if you Google, for instance, spotted hyena zoo exhibit, you'll come up with a bunch of different photos from a bunch of different zoos on how they're housing their hyenas. Another recommendation for you for looking for reference photos would be, it doesn't always have to be the animal that you're building for. For example, if I Googled and could not find anything for spotted hyena, I might try striped hyena. I might try painted African dog. I might even try brown bear, because all of those exhibits are going to have very similar characteristics to what a spotted hyena would need and have. They're all carnivores. They're all going to be housed with protective contact, things like that. They're going to need shiftable areas, back holding, all that kind of stuff. And so you're able to take the reference pictures for maybe a different animal and kind of adapt that to what you want it to be in your own specific zoo. Another little tip is that it doesn't have to come from a zoo. You can Google, sometimes I've found college campus pictures and layouts of just those buildings and stuff very useful. Restaurants that aren't in zoos, they're just restaurants. I've used those for reference photos. I've also Googled different theme parks or different like city parks and nature walks or gardens or things like that. So don't limit yourself to just searching for exactly what you're wanting to build. You're just looking for reference photos. You're just looking for some ideas and a jumping off point to create what you want to create. And shooting in like themes and stuff like that would help as well. You know, African themed restaurant or jungle themed garden walk or whatever it might be, whatever you're searching for. That is a huge help when trying to get inspiration, but also planning for what you're going to build. Speaking of planning, I also do spend quite a lot of time planning out my exhibits before I even open the game. I look at all my reference photos. Usually I will put them kind of all together so that I can view them on one screen while I'm building, so they'll all be kind of next to each other, kind of like a mood board type of thing. And sometimes I do even create like little mood boards where I'll just copy and paste a bunch of photos and stuff onto one particular document, and that way I can view them all at the same time, and that really helps me get a clear vision of where I want my build to head and what direction I want it to head in. So that would be a huge tip if you're new to building in Planet Zoo, or you're just new to building zoo exhibits in general. Definitely utilize those reference photos. For this particular build, I didn't do a whole lot of reference photo searching to start with because I was building it off of the PC exhibit that I already built. However, when I was coming up for the ideas for the original exhibit and a little bit of this here, I did a little bit of searching for just Africa themed exhibits. And I was lucky enough to find like a building with kind of some viewing over an exhibit. I think it was originally for lions, but you get the point. It was something that was in the right theme, had kind of the right elements, things like that. So jumping to the video specifically, we've almost got the perimeter of the exhibit built. And that's something that I actually do on purpose. Usually I build like the perimeter of the build to start with, and I pick out a few areas that I want to view my build from. And that's mostly because I create content with my builds. But I pick out a few little screens that I want to view my build from, and I kind of build around those little snapshots. So for example, the thumbnail that I used and the main viewing for this exhibit is from the guest perspective, the guest viewing area. So I'll do a lot of building a little bit and then panning back to that shot. Do a little bit of building, panning back to that shot. And I do cut some of it out, otherwise I could potentially make you guys carsick. But I do a lot of panning back to these different shots that I want to view my build from. And hopefully that makes sense. It does get a little bit more difficult when I'm building something like this one-off exhibit because I do have to pay attention to the background. So for example, when I'm building an exhibit like this, I will actually put some trees outside of the exhibit. Sometimes I put some buildings outside of the exhibit, or I build up terrain behind the exhibit to give my build a backdrop, something that's not just staring out into the open expanse of the Planet Zoo blank map. It gives it a little bit of a backdrop, a little bit of something to sit against, and it just gives that impression that it's not an exhibit that's free floating out in the world with nothing around it. And I do think that that helps with the detail, and it helps with how it looks overall. Another tip for building specifically with scale is exactly what I'm doing here. As you saw, I brought out a fence piece and I put it right next to the keeper that I have just paused in place on the path so that I can see how tall or how things will scale next to an in-game guest or next to an in-game person. Now on PC, people had made blueprints of people made of objects and build scenery pieces to use. I always just prefer to actually just use a keeper or a vet or a caretaker or mechanic, whatever staff member you want to use that's in the game, because it's easy enough to just drop a little circle of path, throw that keeper down on it, let them hit the ground because they do that little animation where they fall from the sky and then they stand back up, pause your game, and then play with them next to your exhibit so that you can tell how tall, how big things are that you're building. Because sometimes if there's nothing to reference size with, you can end up building something that is way too big or way too small, especially if you're trying to build an exhibit that will match the in-game needs of whatever animal you're building for. Now, in this exhibit specifically, I'm not too worried about animal needs. I'm building this in Sandbox, and so I don't really care too much if it meets the needs of the animal in-game. And that sounds a little bit mean. I do care about the needs of the animal. I'm just not too worried about the specifics of like what kind of landscaping or how big the exhibit is, things like that. I'm just kind of building so that they look good and that it looks like it could be realistic. Like I said in the beginning, just a smidgen of realism, right? Like realism adjacent is what we're going for. We're not going for something extraordinarily realistic here. I just like to build pretty things. So using scale is really important, and so that's what I do, is I use the keepers or whatever staff you want to use so that I make sure that I stay in the proper scale for my exhibit. And next, this is just a tip video for you at this point, talking about how I build and what I recommend. Decorate the outside of your exhibit. The outside of the exhibit is somewhere that gets overlooked, in my opinion, quite frequently, and guest-facing areas are just as important as the interior of your exhibit. It's where your guests are obviously going to be walking around. It's where they're going to be viewing your exhibits from, and guest perspective, especially in real life zoos, is extraordinarily important. You want your guests to feel like the exhibits are nicely set up for the animal, that they look well kept and clean, and part of that is the area the guests will be in as well. So little planters, benches, signage, stuff like that all adds to the detail of your exhibit on the outside, which then will make the exhibit overall look much more put together and much more detailed. Now, I am putting the just about finishing touches on this exhibit here. As I finish up, I'm going to do the roofing on this building and then get to some landscaping, which is usually kind of the last thing that I do. You'll see that I have put in just a few trees and plants and things like that, and that's mostly because I really don't like anything I build until I add some plants to it. Something about the contrast of the greenery and the build just pulls it together for me, and I really don't like what I build until I start to put plants and trees and things like that. So I usually will put a few like key things to kind of test out what kind of colors of plants I'm going to use or what types of plants I'm going to use overall. But then at the very end, I'll go in and I'll add like grasses and bushes and more trees and just kind of round out and finish up the landscaping detail of the exhibit overall. I prefer kind of a sort of overgrown exhibit kind of look. I just think it adds a lot more details. Some creators that are much better at building than I am can pull off this like really minimalistic look with their exhibits, and I just don't understand how they do it. I think my exhibits have to have like 1,000 things to look at in every single corner that you pan from. But you know, whatever you think looks good, whatever you want to do, again, there is no wrong when it comes to creating these exhibits. It's whatever you want to build and whatever makes your heart happy. Cluttering it up with lots of grasses and things like that makes my heart happy. So that's generally how I build. I'll also pay attention to things like shadows from the trees because I want a lot of sunlight on my exhibit, or if I need specific shade areas for the animals, I'll put trees in certain locations to achieve that. I'm also using terrain paint here to finish off just a couple little details of like where the animals would be pacing back and forth or where they walk most frequently, where the keepers walk. Those areas are going to be much more worn down, so I use like the dirt texture there in contrast with the grass to kind of note where animals would be walking really frequently, and that's getting in and out of the pool, up to where they get fed, around the perimeter of the exhibit, so on and so forth. So don't underestimate the use of your terrain paint. It can take a little bit to get it right, and especially on console, I did a lot of like little clicks where I would not click and hold and drag my terrain paint, but instead I would just kind of repetitively hit X and just kind of do little like dabs, little like stamps of terrain paint, and I felt like that really got me the best overall result for my terrain because I wasn't wanting it to be super like, why is chiseled the only word that comes to mind? But do you know what I mean? I kind of wanted it to be a little bit blended. That's a better word than chiseled. I don't understand why that word came to mind, but a little bit blended is what I was going for. And I just felt that that technique is really what got me there. Doing a little bit more detailing, like I mentioned, on the outside of this exhibit with the guest-facing area. I do end up extending this little planter out and around anyway, just to kind of fill up that little bit of gap between the pathing. I really wasn't able to get rid of that, so I do end up extending that planter out around to the side, adding some more plants and things like that, which I actually helped, or I think helped, excuse me, kind of bring in and tie in the exhibit a little bit better. Here I am extending it as I'm saying that, and just adding some more plants around the corner to kind of block off the area where the keepers would enter and exit, to kind of make it a little bit separate from the actual viewing area on the exhibit. And I think after that, there's not much more to be done. Now, don't forget that Planet Zoo Console Edition is actually released now. It's available for you to purchase, so if you'd like to do that, I do have a key down in the comment section below. Nope, in the description section below. Excuse me, it is not in the comment section, but it is in the description below, and you are able to use that link to go pick up a copy for yourself, of course, either on PS5 or Xbox. And I am, of course, playing on a PS5. I can't remember if I actually said that or not. If I did, I apologize, but if I did not, I'm playing on Xbox. And I almost completely forgot the little shelters that I build for these guys. So I am actually kind of sort of proud of how these turned out. I was very much missing my faux aquatic rocks on these ones because originally on the PC version, that's what I built these little shelters out of. I do get a lot of tiling effect on these ones, which I try to mitigate just a little bit by kind of rotating some pieces and whatnot. But in the end, I kind of was a little bit okay with how they ended up turning out with the tiling, because I did feel like maybe they felt like man-made shelters anyway, which is what they're meant to be. They were meant to be like faux created little shelters for the hyenas to hang out in. So I do a little bit to try to get rid of some of that tiling just a little bit and make them a little bit varied. But in the end, I don't worry about it too much. And then I end up duplicating this. There's 2 in the main exhibit and 1 in kind of the back holding area as well. And again, the hitboxes of the hyenas don't actually allow them to use these, but I just like how they look, and they look like they would be the right size for them to kind of snuggle up in and lay down. So I really wasn't too worried about the hyenas using them at all. But boy, oh boy, can I not wait for future DLC to come out and for me to get a hold of those aquatic rocks again, because I knew that I used them a lot, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, but I had no idea just how much I would really truly miss those pieces in specific. So I can't wait for them to come to console so that I can have access to them to build. I actually, honestly, speaking of rocks specifically, I'm obviously using a combination of I think it's the desert rocks and the grassland rocks, because I wanted this exhibit to have kind of a savanna biome feel to it. I haven't actually built with the naturalistic rocks in a long time, but doing that, I'm using, as I mentioned, 2 different styles of the rocks, 2 different colorations to kind of give a little bit of variation. You can get really stuck in a kind of monotoned build if you don't do little things like this and you don't use a little bit of variation with pieces, or if you're using a recolorable piece. Something that I'll do quite often is I will select random pieces in whatever it is that I've built, and I'll change them to either slightly lighter or slightly darker from the original color, and that just gives it a little bit more of a realistic touch. Because when you look at a building, or you look at a fence, or you look at anything, almost nothing is the exact same color on every single aspect of whatever it is you're looking at. You know, things like weathering and sun bleaching happen with stuff that's outside. So giving a little bit of contrast between lighter and darker shades of the same color really goes a long way to add just a little bit of detail to your exhibit. So that's what I was really trying to recreate with those two different color palette rocks. You can see that mostly on the back wall of the exhibit, where I used both rocks kind of pushed into one another so that only a little bit of one rock was showing out of the top of the other one. And so you get that contrast between two different colors and gives it a little more interest, just a little bit more detail. And with that, this exhibit is pretty much done. I'm going to take a few more of the plants and things and do the same kind of landscaping in the back support holding area. Again, with spotted hyenas being a predator animal, I imagine keepers would be working close contact with them, meaning they're not going to enter the exhibit with the hyenas. So they're going to need somewhere to shift them on and off exhibit while the keepers take care of the exhibit itself, or if you need somewhere else to put an injured or sick hyena, things like that. So that's really what I was trying to replicate with this kind of back holding area and the catch pen in between, so that there was somewhere for them to move the hyenas off exhibit. Adding a little bit of enrichment and things like that so the hyenas have stuff to do in their exhibit, and it's pretty much done. We're going to jump in and take a look at an end cinematic here, just the exhibit overall. Thank you all so much for watching, and again, thank you to Frontier for sponsoring today's video. If you're still watching and you enjoyed, first of all, thank you so very much. Leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. Comments, questions, suggestions are always welcome. And of course, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. I hope you enjoyed this little exhibit build, and keep an eye out for a couple other builds coming out on the channel very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk at you in the next video. Bye!